There are doors in this world that have no signs. No applications. No interviews. They open only when you know the handshake. For over 300 years, Freemasonry has granted its members something that can't be bought, inherited, or earned through merit alone. Access. Not the kind you see. The kind you feel. And once you understand how it works, you start to see it everywhere. In 1731, a young printer in Philadelphia was struggling. His name was Benjamin Franklin. Benjamin Franklin had talent, ambition, even charm. But in colonial America, those things weren't enough. What he needed was patronage. A network. Men who would vouch for him without question. That same year, Franklin joined the Freemasons. Within months, he was printing for the colonial government. Within years, he was dining with governors, shaping policy, securing contracts that built his fortune. Was it his skill? Certainly. But thousands of printers had skill. Franklin had something else. A circle of brothers who opened doors the moment he knocked. This wasn't luck. It was design. What most people never realize is that Freemasonry was never about secrecy for secrecy's sake. It was about trust. In a world where bloodlines determined everything, the lodge offered something radical, a brotherhood that transcended birth. If you were a Mason, you could walk into a city where no one knew your name and find a network waiting. A judge who would hear your case more favorably. A banker who would extend you credit. A merchant who would do business without collateral. Not because of corruption. Because of confidence. The handshake was a guarantee. A silent contract that said, "This man has been vetted. This man belongs." And in the 18th and 19th centuries, that meant everything. By the 1750s, Freemasonry had woven itself into the fabric of British colonial power. Provincial governors were Masons. Military officers were Masons. The men who controlled trade routes, land grants, and legal appointments, Masons. When George Washington took command of the Continental Army, more than half his generals were lodge brothers. When the Revolution ended, 33 of the 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence had Masonic ties. And when the new nation needed a structure, those same men shaped it. They didn't do this in shadow. They did it in plain sight. Because no one thought to ask. Who built the networks that built the country? In courtrooms across America and Europe, something peculiar was happening. Cases that should have been lost were quietly won. Sentences that should have been harsh were strangely lenient. Disputes between Masons and non-Masons often tilted in one direction, subtly, but consistently. There's a documented case from 1826, a man named William Morgan. Morgan was a Mason who threatened to publish the fraternity's secrets. He disappeared. His body was never found. What followed was a scandal that nearly destroyed Freemasonry in America. Investigations revealed that sheriffs, judges, and jurors, many of them Masons, had quietly obstructed justice. Not through violence. Through silence. Through a shared understanding that certain things weren't discussed. And certain brothers weren't betrayed. Access doesn't announce itself. It appears as a business opportunity that arrives at the perfect time. A letter of recommendation from someone you've never met. A court case that settles before it reaches trial. Throughout the 19th century, Masonic lodges functioned as unofficial employment agencies. If you needed a clerk, you asked a brother. If you needed a partner, you asked a brother. If your son needed a position, a Mason somewhere would make it happen. This wasn't charity. It was strategy. By ensuring their members succeeded, the lodge ensured its own power. Successful Masons became influential Masons. Influential Masons recruited more successful men. And the cycle continued. There's a photograph from 1909. 27 men stand on the steps of a courthouse in Ohio. Judges, lawyers, politicians. All Masons. Beneath them, carved into the stone, are Masonic symbols. A square. A compass. Symbols that appear on buildings in nearly every major city in the Western world. Courthouses. Banks. Libraries. Government halls. Not hidden. Just unnoticed. Because most people don't know what they're looking at. But if you were a Mason, you saw them. And you knew, this place was built by brothers. Which meant you weren't walking into a room of strangers. You were walking into a room that already knew your value. By the 20th century, Freemasonry had become something else. Presidents were Masons. Truman. Roosevelt. Ford. Supreme Court justices. Senators. Governors. And not because the lodge sought power, but because powerful men sought the lodge. Because membership meant legitimacy. When you sit in a room with men who control industries, armies, courts, you don't need to ask for favors. You simply exist in proximity to power. And power, over time, shares itself. A casual conversation at a lodge dinner becomes a government contract 6 months later. A handshake at a funeral becomes a board seat. This is how elite networks have always worked. Not through conspiracy. Through continuity. What ordinary people never get is this. A system where trust is guaranteed before a single word is spoken. Where your reputation is inherited from the lodge itself. Where failure is softened and success is amplified by men who have no reason to help you, except that you share a ritual, a symbol, a bond that's older than any of you. It's not magic. It's social architecture. And it's been functioning, quietly, for over 3 centuries. In the 1980s, a study was conducted in Britain. Researchers examined thousands of court cases and found that Masonic judges were statistically more likely to rule in favor of Masonic defendants. The difference was small. But it was measurable. When confronted, the judges didn't deny it. They simply said, "We trust our brothers." And in a system where trust is everything, that's not corruption. That's culture. Today, Freemasonry claims it's about charity and philosophy. And perhaps it is. But for centuries, it was about something else entirely. It was about building a parallel structure within society, one that operated on loyalty, discretion, and mutual benefit. A structure that didn't overthrow power. It inherited it. Because when enough judges, generals, bankers, and presidents belong to the same fraternity, you don't need to control the system. You are the system. There are advantages in this world that never appear on paper. They aren't advertised. They aren't debated. They simply exist. Passed down, year after year, handshake after handshake. And if you've never stood in a room where everyone already trusts you, where doors open before you knock, then you'll never quite understand what you're missing. Not because it's hidden. But because no one ever thought to show you where to look. The lodge isn't a conspiracy. It's a promise. And for those who belong, that promise has always been kept. What most people never realize is that inequality is not always enforced by law. Sometimes, it is preserved by access. Access to rooms you never see. Access to conversations you never hear. Freemasonry did not invent this system. It simply perfected it for its time. And that may be the most unsettling truth of all. Because it suggests that the greatest advantages in history were not stolen. They were shared, quietly, among those who knew how to recognize one another. And when the door closed behind them, nothing needed to be said.